Why did a young woman walk into a classified drop site, carrying a signal only the dead were supposed to know? Marcus Thompson stood in the cold, hollow silence of the Chicago warehouse, his instincts screaming that something about this night was wrong. The place smelled of rust and machine oil, the kind of forgotten corner where government secrets were buried and then denied. He had seen enough black-budget operations to recognize when a meeting didn't belong on any official schedule. But this felt like walking into a ghost story. Across the dimly lit space, a woman waited, calm, motionless, almost bored. She couldn't have been more than 25, dressed in jeans and a weathered leather jacket. No tactical gear, no badge, no visible weapon. Yet something about her posture made his pulse tick faster. Marcus broke the silence first. "Look, lady, I don't know who sent you, but this isn't a playground. You're trespassing on classified ground." Her expression didn't change. Just a slow, assessing look like she was studying him rather than listening. Then she moved her hands, a flicker of motion, precise and deliberate. Marcus froze. Those hands signals, that rhythm, it hit him like a shockwave. He knew that pattern, knew it because he'd written it. 3 gestures, pause, 2 sharp reversals, then 1 slow arc. It wasn't just any field signal. It was Nightfall Protocol Alpha. A communication code buried so deep inside Special Operations Command that fewer than 50 people in the world had ever been cleared to use it. A signal designed for one purpose: to identify a member of a program that officially didn't exist. "Only Black Ops use that signal," he said, his voice tightening. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head slightly, a small smile flickering at the corner of her mouth. "You tell me," she murmured, her tone soft but edged with something dangerous. Marcus's hand instinctively shifted closer to his concealed sidearm. He didn't believe in coincidences. And the last time anyone had used that signal had been 6 years ago, outside Moscow, during an operation that had ended with 3 agents dead, and a government cover-up thicker than ice on the Volga. That mission had a name that haunted him even now: Operation Nightfall. The woman stepped closer into the shaft of moonlight cutting through the broken warehouse window. Her features were sharp, controlled, her green eyes too calm for someone standing a few feet from an armed intelligence officer. "I'm waiting for an explanation," Marcus pressed. "Because that signal, that was top-tier black, and if you're not supposed to know it, we're both already in deep trouble." She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her jacket pocket, slow, deliberate. Marcus's weapon cleared the holster in half a second. "Easy," she said softly, pulling out a small device that looked like an ordinary cell phone. "You developed those signals in 2019. Team 7, Colonel Richards, Nightfall." Marcus's pulse spiked. His weapon wavered slightly. There was no way she could know that. His team had been buried under a stack of redacted files after Moscow. Half were dead. The survivors had been forced into silence under non-disclosure orders that didn't technically exist. "How do you know about Moscow?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. She powered on the device. Lights blinked in sequence, red, then white, then a soft amber pulse. Marcus felt his breath catch. That pattern, it wasn't just recognition, it was the countersignal. The one designed as the perfect response to his own, the one that completed the communication loop. But that countersignal had never been taught to anyone outside the top-level command structure. Even he didn't know the full sequence. He had designed half of it. The other half was locked behind 3 separate clearances, each belonging to agencies that didn't talk to each other. Yet here she was, executing it flawlessly. The glow of the device reflected in her eyes as she said quietly, "My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm here because Operation Nightfall was never shut down. It evolved." Marcus felt the air thicken around him, heavy with the kind of realization that bends a man's belief in his country. "Sarah Chen." The name had floated through intelligence rumor like smoke, a myth, a cover identity recycled to confuse foreign agencies. There was no real Sarah Chen. Until now. He stared at her, his voice trembling slightly despite his control. That's impossible. You're a ghost, a legend. Her smile deepened, but it wasn't amusement. It was something closer to exhaustion. That's exactly what they wanted you to think, she said. But I'm real enough for what comes next. Before he could respond, the sound of engines echoed through the empty district. Multiple vehicles, heavy, moving fast. Sarah's eyes sharpened instantly. They found us. How? Marcus demanded. Because they've been tracking you for months, she said, already moving toward the back of the warehouse. Ever since you started asking questions about your old team. Marcus's stomach dropped. He thought the accidents that took his former teammates were random, Miller's car crash, Johnson's house fire. But what if? Are you saying? They weren't accidents, Sarah cut in, and if you don't move, you'll join them. Marcus followed her into the labyrinth of shipping containers, his training kicking in automatically. The air buzzed with tension, the low hum of danger pressing in. Boots hit pavement outside. He counted 7 distinct footsteps spreading out in tactical formation. Whoever they were professionals. How do you know this route? He whispered. I scouted it last week, she said. I've been preparing for this meeting for 3 years. Her voice carried something that wasn't just confidence, it was weariness. Like someone who had been running for so long that standing still felt unnatural. They stopped behind a rusted container stamped with Chinese shipping codes. The headlights of an approaching SUV cut through the warehouse entrance. Shadows stretched long and sharp. Marcus drew his pistol, his nerves steady but his heart hammering. You better start talking fast because right now I don't know if I'm running with the right person. Sarah crouched, removing the battery from her phone. You remember the Moscow incident, she whispered. The defector we were supposed to extract. Marcus nodded slowly. Russian intelligence officer wanted to come over. Mission went sideways. Sarah's eyes met his. He wasn't Russian, he was one of ours. Marcus stared at her. That's impossible. He discovered something inside our own system, she continued, her voice tight. Something people at the top would kill to bury. The realization hit him like cold steel. You're saying we were set up. I'm saying your friends died because the truth was inconvenient. Before Marcus could respond, a voice boomed from the warehouse entrance, sharp, commanding, amplified by a portable speaker. Thompson, we know you're in there. Come out and no one gets hurt. Sarah didn't even look up. They always say that, she muttered. The metallic click of safeties, releasing, echoed through the space. Marcus's mind raced. Whoever these people were, they were operating with precision. No uniforms, no visible insignia. Too professional for police. Too quiet for mercenaries. That left only one possibility. They were insiders. Move, Sarah hissed. She sprinted toward the back wall, weaving between containers with practiced agility. Marcus followed close behind, every sense alive, the gun firm in his grip. When they reached a dead end, she pressed her palm against the steel plating, and the wall shifted open on hidden hinges. Marcus blinked. You planned for this. I planned for everything. They slipped through the hidden passage just as footsteps stormed the other side of the warehouse. The narrow corridor led to a rear alley, where a black motorcycle waited under a flickering streetlight. Sarah tossed him a helmet. Get on. He hesitated. This is insane. Welcome to nightfall. She started the engine, and the night exploded into motion. The bike roared down the alley, tires slicing through puddles as muzzle flashes lit the shadows behind them. Suppressed rounds sparked off brick walls. Marcus ducked instinctively, gripping her waist for balance as they sped into the empty streets. Chicago's industrial district blurred around them. Steel, concrete, and the ghostly glow of streetlights reflecting off rain-slick pavement. Behind them, black SUVs gave chase. 2, maybe 3. Their headlights flared like predatory eyes. Marcus shouted over the engine noise. "That safe house you mentioned, it better be worth dying for." Sarah's voice was calm, almost too calm. "It's not worth dying for, it's worth finishing for." They cut through an intersection, narrowly avoiding a collision with a semi-truck, then plunged into a maze of side streets. The sound of sirens rose in the distance, but Sarah seemed to know exactly where she was going. When they finally stopped, it was inside an underground garage beneath a crumbling apartment block. Sarah dismounted first, scanning the corners before motioning him to follow. "Third floor," she whispered, "keep quiet." Inside, the apartment was dim and chaotic. Walls covered in photographs, maps, and string diagrams connecting faces Marcus recognized from government briefings. He stepped closer, eyes wide. "These are real, these are my team." Sarah nodded, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "And this," she said quietly, "is the part they never wanted you to see." Marcus stared at the photos, his dead friends, their faces marked with red ink and dates that didn't match their reported times of death. He sank into a chair, the bitter coffee burning his throat. "How long have you been watching me?" 6 months, Sarah said. "I needed to know if you were one of them or one of us." Her voice carried no accusation, just tired honesty. Marcus looked up. "And what am I?" She met his eyes for the first time with something like trust. "We'll find out soon enough." Outside, thunder rolled over the city. The sound felt distant, unreal, like the echo of a storm that had started years ago and was only now reaching them. Somewhere in that thunder was the whisper of what came next, the unraveling of a conspiracy so vast it would shake the foundations of everything they believed. But for now, in the quiet between storms, Sarah Chin finally let out a long breath. "They think they ended nightfall," she said softly. "They were wrong." And in that single sentence, calm, defiant, and full of grief, Marcus realized the truth. This wasn't the beginning of a chase. It was the start of a reckoning. Why would anyone build a wall of secrets just to protect a lie? Marcus stared at the photographs covering Sarah's apartment wall, a twisted constellation of faces, maps, and red strings connecting names he thought belonged to heroes. Now they looked like ghosts haunting their own government. The rain tapped against the window like a slow countdown. "You're telling me," Marcus said quietly, "that all these deaths were connected to Moscow?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She was standing near a corkboard covered in printed documents, her fingers tracing one particular photo, a man in a Russian officer's uniform. His expression was calm, almost proud. Written underneath were the words, "Viktor Petrov, CIA asset 15 years. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of everything she had survived. "Petrov wasn't defecting, Marcus. He was coming home." Marcus's stomach turned. "Coming home? You're saying he was one of us?" Sarah nodded. "A deep-cover operative embedded in Russian intelligence for over a decade. He'd been feeding us information not from Moscow to Washington, but from inside our own ranks. He found something buried so deep it terrified him." Marcus ran a hand over his face. What could scare a man like that? She turned toward him. Her eyes were sharp, but there was exhaustion in them, the kind that comes from carrying the truth alone for too long. "He uncovered a network inside our government, a shadow organization made up of senior military and intelligence officers. They called themselves the Prometheus Group." Marcus frowned. "Never heard of it." "You weren't supposed to," she replied. "Prometheus isn't a rogue cell, it's a cancer that's been growing for years. They operate through legitimate channels, defense contractors, classified operations, budget slush funds. But their real purpose," she paused, "control." The word hung heavy in the air. Sarah stepped closer to the evidence board and pointed at several names connected by red string high-ranking officials, some still in active command. They manipulate missions, sell state secrets, rewrite operational history, and when someone gets too close, they die quietly, labeled as accidents, suicides, or operational losses. Marcus's mind spun back to his old teammates, Miller, Johnson, Davis. He'd gone to their funerals. He'd folded the flags himself. Johnson, he said quietly, was murdered last year, his car crash. Wasn't an accident, Sarah confirmed. He started asking questions about Petrov too. Marcus looked down at the floor, jaw tightening. The sense of betrayal hit him like shrapnel. How long have you known? 3 years, Sarah said. Since Moscow. Petrov passed me the last cache of evidence before he was killed. Financial records, communication intercepts, black site directives, all leading back to the same group. Prometheus wanted him dead, and they wanted every trace of Nightfall erased. Marcus looked up. But if Petrov had that kind of proof, why didn't he go public? He tried, she whispered. But by then, the people controlling the system were already inside it. Every whistleblower, every leak, every classified report, it all funneled back to them. Petrov's death was covered up before the gunfire stopped. The silence that followed felt like a confession neither of them wanted to make. Finally Marcus spoke, voice barely above a whisper. So what's the endgame? Money, power? Sarah turned away, walking toward the window. The city lights reflected faintly off the rain. Something worse. They're planning a false flag operation, a staged terrorist attack that will justify martial law. Once it happens, Prometheus will control every level of government, permanently. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. You're serious? I wish I wasn't, she said. Petrov called it Operation Liberty's End. He let the name sink in, the irony, the bitterness, the precision of it. Liberty's End. How much time do we have? Sarah hesitated. 3 days. The words landed like a punch. He stared at her. You've had this information for 3 years and you're telling me now 3 days before it happens. I couldn't trust anyone, she shot back, her composure cracking for the first time. Do you have any idea what it's like to live hunted? Every phone call a risk, every face a possible assassin. You think I wanted this? I watched everyone I cared about vanish because they believed the truth mattered. And maybe they were right, but I wasn't going to die for a headline. Her voice wavered, not weakness, but exhaustion. The kind that settles in when courage becomes survival. Marcus's anger softened. He'd seen soldiers break down in the field, but Sarah wasn't breaking. She was finally letting herself feel. He took a deep breath. All right, then what do we do? Sarah exhaled slowly, her eyes flicking back to the maps. We fight back, but smart. We can't go to the press. We can't go through official channels. We need someone with authority, someone uncorrupted, someone who can act outside the chain of command. Someone like who? She looked at him. You tell me, Marcus. You know the military's upper ranks better than anyone. Who can we trust? Marcus hesitated, names flashing through his mind, officers he'd served under, mentors who'd shaped him, some who'd buried him in bureaucracy. Most of them were either retired, compromised, or too afraid to move without political cover. But then one name surfaced, steady, uncompromising, incorruptible. General Patricia Morrison. He met Sarah's gaze. I might know someone. Before she could respond, a sound broke through the moment, footsteps in the hallway. Multiple, close. Sarah's eyes snapped to the door. Marcus grabbed his weapon instinctively. You said this place was clean. It was. The footsteps stopped just outside the apartment. Silence stretched, too long, too perfect. Then the crash of the door splintering open. Move, Sarah shouted, pulling Marcus toward the window. Bullets ripped through the drywall as they dove behind an overturned table. The room exploded in chaos, flashes, smoke, shouts. "Fire escape," she yelled, firing 2 quick shots to suppress the attackers. The muzzle flare lit her face in sharp bursts, calm, focused, lethal. Marcus covered her flank as they climbed through the window and out into the freezing rain. Below, black SUVs lined the street, the same ones from the warehouse. Tactical teams swarmed the alley, sweeping upward. They climbed fast, boots slipping on the wet metal. Marcus's shoulder burned, the old injury from Moscow screaming in protest. But adrenaline drowned the pain. On the roof, the wind tore through their clothes, carrying the scent of smoke and rain. Shouts echoed below as flashlights swept across the fire escape. "Keep moving," Sarah said, running toward the edge. "Where?" "There." She pointed to the next rooftop, a narrow 8-foot gap with a 5-story drop below. Without hesitation, she sprinted and jumped. Marcus's gut twisted as she disappeared into the dark, then landed hard and rolled, coming up ready to cover him. "Your turn," she called out. He didn't think, he just ran. The world tilted as his boots left the edge. For a second he was weightless, suspended over the void. Then the impact hit, a jolt through his bones as he rolled and came up beside her. They ran again, ducking low as rounds cracked behind them. The echo of gunfire merged with thunder until it was impossible to tell which was which. Finally, they reached a rooftop access door. Sarah fished a key from her jacket. How many safe houses had she planned? How many lives had she lived under other names? The door opened into a dark stairwell. The smell of mildew and dust filled the air. They descended quickly, their footsteps echoing down the concrete shaft. On the 7th floor, Sarah stopped. "In here." It was another apartment, abandoned, half-finished, walls covered in old newspapers. But the equipment inside was anything but old. Computers, encrypted radios, satellite relays, a miniature intelligence hub glowing softly in the dark. Marcus exhaled. "You've been busy." Sarah powered on one of the terminals. The screen flickered to life, a map of the United States, dotted with pulsing red markers. "These are Prometheus Group assets," she said. "Everywhere they have influence, military bases, agencies, private contractors. The red ones are confirmed. The rest are suspected." Marcus leaned closer. "There's hundreds." "Thousands," she corrected. "This isn't a handful of traitors, it's a system." He stared at the map, the enormity sinking in. "How do we stop something like this?" "We don't," she said quietly. "Not alone." Outside, sirens wailed again, closer this time. Marcus turned to her. "You said you needed someone uncorrupted. Morrison fits that bill. She owes me one, and if anyone can move without permission, it's her." Sarah's eyes searched his face. "You trust her?" "I want to," he said honestly, "and right now that's enough." She nodded once, decision settling over her like armor. "Then we move tonight." Marcus glanced at the door. "They'll follow." "They always do," she said softly, checking her weapon. "But if Prometheus wants to silence us, they'll have to do it before the truth speaks." She paused, hand on the doorknob, and for a heartbeat, just one, the mask dropped. He saw the fear she buried under steel discipline. He saw the exhaustion of years spent running from her own side. And for the first time, he realized she wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting for redemption. As they disappeared down the stairwell, Marcus's thoughts turned to Morrison, the one person who could turn this quiet rebellion into a revolution. But in the dark, Sarah's words echoed in his mind. "They think they ended Nightfall. They were wrong." How do you ask someone to believe the unbelievable when the truth itself sounds like treason? The city lights of Washington, D.C., glowed faintly through the mist as Marcus Thompson watched from the shadows of an alley. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, heavy with that strange mix of history and secrets that only the capital carried. They had driven all night from Chicago, taking back roads, switching vehicles twice, and avoiding every major highway. Sarah hadn't spoken much during the trip. She sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, lost in thoughts that looked heavier than words could carry. Now, as dawn crept over the Potomac, Marcus made the call. He used an old military sat-link device, one of the few not connected to modern networks. Static crackled through the line before a voice answered. General Patricia Morrison. Her tone was firm, professional, the voice of someone used to giving orders that changed lives. General, it's Marcus Thompson. Silence, then disbelief. Marcus, that's impossible. The report said you died 6 months ago. That's what they wanted you to think, Marcus said quietly. General, I need your help, and I need you to listen very carefully. There was another pause, longer this time. He could almost hear the machinery of her mind working, analyzing, calculating risk. Where are you? She finally asked. Can't say on this channel, Marcus replied. But we need to meet, tonight, somewhere public but controlled, somewhere you can confirm who I am. She hesitated only a moment longer. The Washington Monument, midnight, come alone and bring proof. The line went dead. Marcus slipped the device back into his jacket and exhaled. Sarah, who had been quietly reloading her sidearm by the car, looked up. She'll show. She'll show, Marcus said. But if she thinks we're lying, we won't make it out of there. Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. Then we better not give her a reason to doubt. The Washington Monument rose like a pale spear through the night sky. The area was quiet now, empty except for a few night joggers and the distant hum of security drones scanning the perimeter. General Morrison stood near the reflecting pool, her posture rigid even out of uniform. She'd aged since Marcus had last seen her, but her presence was still unmistakable, the same commanding calm that had once steadied soldiers under fire. Marcus approached cautiously, Sarah walking a few paces behind. Morrison's eyes never left them. Her right hand rested casually near her coat pocket, close enough to whatever weapon she was carrying. General, Marcus said, stopping a few feet away. Thompson, she replied, you'd better start talking before I decide this is a trap. He gestured toward Sarah. This is Sarah Chen. She's been investigating a covert network inside our own agencies, a group called Prometheus. Morrison's eyes flicked toward Sarah, assessing. You're the operative who doesn't exist, she said. Naval intelligence has been chasing your name for years. Sarah met her gaze calmly. They've been chasing a ghost. The real Sarah Chen died 2 years ago. I took her identity to stay hidden while I finished what she started. Something shifted in Morrison's expression, suspicion giving way to reluctant curiosity. Show me, she said. Sarah handed her a small encrypted tablet. Everything you need is on this drive: financial records, intercepted comms, operation files. The group calls itself Prometheus. They're planning simultaneous attacks on American cities, designed to look like foreign terrorism. Morrison activated the device, scrolling through the files. The glow from the screen reflected in her glasses as she read. Her face hardened with each page. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, controlled, but shaken. These are official transmission codes. Some of these came from inside the Pentagon. Marcus nodded grimly. Admiral Jonathan Hayes, he's leading it, you know him. Morrison froze. Hayes, she repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper. He's one of the most decorated officers in the Navy. I've known him 20 years. Then you know how dangerous he is, Marcus said. For a long moment, Morrison said nothing. She just stared out toward the monument, her reflection trembling in the water below. The betrayal written on her face was subtle, but real. Even if this is true, she said finally, what can 3 people do against something this big? Sarah took a step forward. We don't need to stop them outright. We just need to disrupt them. The attacks depend on perfect coordination. If we break even one part of the chain, the entire operation collapses. Morrison studied her closely. You're talking about simultaneous intervention, at multiple target sites. Exactly, Sarah said. New York, Los Angeles, Dallas. The attacks are scheduled for Saturday night, 11:47 p.m. local time. If we can place trusted teams in position, intercept the attackers, and broadcast the evidence in real time, we can expose the conspiracy before they activate martial law. Morrison frowned. Broadcast? You think the media will believe something this insane? They won't have to believe, Sarah replied. They'll see. Live footage, intercepted transmissions, captured operatives. If we can force daylight onto the truth, Prometheus won't have anywhere to hide. The general was quiet again. Then she asked the question Marcus had been dreading. Why should I trust you? Marcus looked her straight in the eye. Because you taught me to follow my oath, not my orders. That broke something in her. The hardness in her eyes softened, just for a heartbeat, enough to show that she still remembered the young officer who'd once stood in her command tent, bleeding and defiant, saying those same words. Finally she nodded. All right, Thompson, you have my attention, but I'll need proof of Hayes's involvement. Sarah tapped the tablet again, bringing up an audio file. Hayes's voice filled the night air, calm, commanding, horrifyingly casual. Estimated civilian casualties, under 50,000 if containment holds. Acceptable losses. The political leverage will outweigh the risk. Morrison's jaw tightened. She didn't say a word. There's more, Sarah said. Another file played, a series of encrypted messages showing Hayes communicating with known foreign agents. He's not just staging a coup, Sarah continued. He's colluding with outside powers, the kind that want to see America burn from within. Morrison closed the tablet and looked at them both. If any of this gets out before we act, they'll disappear us before sunrise. We'll need to move in silence. Marcus nodded. We know. Then listen carefully, she said. Her voice shifted into command mode, crisp, decisive, the way it always had in the field. You'll coordinate intelligence and tactical timing. I'll handle the personnel. I still have field commanders who trust me, people not compromised by politics. Sarah asked, how long will it take to assemble the teams? 6 hours, Morrison said. I'll need to vet every name personally. No communications through Pentagon channels. Everything runs dark. Marcus glanced around, scanning the shadows for movement. The monument's floodlights glimmered across the pool like fractured glass. General, he said quietly, if this goes wrong. She finished the sentence for him. We'll be branded as traitors, I know. Then she did something unexpected. She extended her hand to Sarah first. For what it's worth, Morrison said, I've spent my life cleaning up after men like Hayes. It's time someone finished the job. Sarah took her hand, and for the first time in years, she smiled, a small, tired smile that looked like hope rediscovering itself. As Morrison walked away into the fog, Sarah turned to Marcus. You trust her. Marcus watched the general's silhouette fade into the distance. I trust her enough to bet my life on her, and right now, that's all we've got. They reconvened 8 hours later inside an abandoned warehouse outside Arlington. A temporary command post Morrison had secured using her old covert channels. The place smelled of dust and old oil, but the atmosphere was electric. Maps were spread across tables. Satellite feeds flickered on portable monitors. Morrison stood at the center, issuing orders with quiet precision. 3 teams, she said. New York, LA, Dallas, each led by someone I trust completely. She pointed to photos pinned to the map. Colonel Martinez, Major Chen, Captain Brooks. Veterans, loyal, clean. Operation Liberty's end will begin at 11:47 p.m. across all 3 cities. Our teams will intercept at 11:43. That gives us 4 minutes to stop the attacks before detonation or execution. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a glance. 4 minutes. That's not a window, Marcus muttered. That's a wish. It's all we've got, Morrison replied. Sarah moved closer to one of the monitors. reviewing live satellite imagery of each target zone, a subway terminal in New York, an airport fuel depot in Los Angeles, and a power grid facility in Dallas. The scale of it made her stomach twist. 3 cities, 3 false flags, one night that could end the Republic. Morrison leaned over the table. If we succeed, we expose them. If we fail, we become the villains in their story, Sarah said quietly. Marcus looked around the room, 3 soldiers and a woman who didn't officially exist, trying to stop a shadow government no one believed in. He thought about the irony, that saving their country meant becoming fugitives in its eyes. He turned to Sarah. We'll only get one shot at this. You ready? Sarah stared at the map, her expression distant but her voice steady. I've been ready since Moscow. And as the warehouse filled with the quiet hum of strategy and fate, the 3 of them understood what the night ahead truly meant. It wasn't just about stopping bombs or traitors. It was about saving a country that didn't even know it was in danger. How do you ask someone to believe the unbelievable when the truth itself sounds like treason? The city lights of Washington, D.C., glowed faintly through the mist as Marcus Thompson watched from the shadows of an alley. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, heavy with that strange mix of history and secrets that only the capital carried. They had driven all night from Chicago, taking back roads, switching vehicles twice, and avoiding every major highway. Sarah hadn't spoken much during the trip. She sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, lost in thoughts that looked heavier than words could carry. Now, as dawn crept over the Potomac, Marcus made the call. He used an old military sat-link device, one of the few not connected to modern networks. Static crackled through the line before a voice answered. General Patricia Morrison. Her tone was firm, professional, the voice of someone used to giving orders that changed lives. General, it's Marcus Thompson. Silence, then disbelief. Marcus, that's impossible. The report said you died 6 months ago. That's what they wanted you to think, Marcus said quietly. General, I need your help, and I need you to listen very carefully. There was another pause, longer this time. He could almost hear the machinery of her mind working, analyzing, calculating risk. Where are you? She finally asked. Can't say on this channel, Marcus replied. But we need to meet, tonight, somewhere public but controlled, somewhere you can confirm who I am. She hesitated only a moment longer. The Washington Monument, midnight, come alone and bring proof. The line went dead. Marcus slipped the device back into his jacket and exhaled. Sarah, who had been quietly reloading her sidearm by the car, looked up. She'll show. She'll show, Marcus said. But if she thinks we're lying, we won't make it out of there. Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. Then we better not give her a reason to doubt. The Washington Monument rose like a pale spear through the night sky. The area was quiet now, empty except for a few night joggers and the distant hum of security drones scanning the perimeter. General Morrison stood near the reflecting pool, her posture rigid even out of uniform. She'd aged since Marcus had last seen her, but her presence was still unmistakable, the same commanding calm that had once steadied soldiers under fire. Marcus approached cautiously, Sarah walking a few paces behind. Morrison's eyes never left them. Her right hand rested casually near her coat pocket, close enough to whatever weapon she was carrying. General, Marcus said, stopping a few feet away. Thompson, she replied, you'd better start talking before I decide this is a trap. He gestured toward Sarah. This is Sarah Chen. She's been investigating a covert network inside our own agencies, a group called Prometheus. Morrison's eyes flicked toward Sarah, assessing. You're the operative who doesn't exist, she said. Naval intelligence has been chasing your name for years. Sarah met her gaze calmly. They've been chasing a ghost. The real Sarah Chen died 2 years ago. I took her identity to stay hidden while I finished what she started. Something shifted in Morrison's expression, suspicion giving way to reluctant curiosity. "Show me," she said. Sarah handed her a small encrypted tablet. "Everything you need is on this drive: financial records, intercepted comms, operation files. The group calls itself Prometheus. They're planning simultaneous attacks on American cities designed to look like foreign terrorism." Morrison activated the device, scrolling through the files. The glow from the screen reflected in her glasses as she read. Her face hardened with each page. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, controlled, but shaken. "These are official transmission codes. Some of these came from inside the Pentagon." Marcus nodded grimly. "Admiral Jonathan Hayes, he's leading it, you know him." Morrison froze. "Hayes," she repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's one of the most decorated officers in the Navy. I've known him 20 years. "Then you know how dangerous he is," Marcus said. For a long moment, Morrison said nothing. She just stared out toward the monument, her reflection trembling in the water below. The betrayal written on her face was subtle, but real. "Even if this is true," she said finally, "what can 3 people do against something this big?" Sarah took a step forward. "We don't need to stop them outright. We just need to disrupt them. The attacks depend on perfect coordination. If we break even one part of the chain, the entire operation collapses." Morrison studied her closely. "You're talking about simultaneous intervention at multiple target sites." "Exactly," Sarah said. "New York, Los Angeles, Dallas. The attacks are scheduled for Saturday night, 11:47 p.m. local time. If we can place trusted teams in position, intercept the attackers, and broadcast the evidence in real time, we can expose the conspiracy before they activate martial law." Morrison frowned. "Broadcast? You think the media will believe something this insane?" "They won't have to believe," Sarah replied. "They'll see. Live footage, intercepted transmissions, captured operatives. If we can force daylight onto the truth, Prometheus won't have anywhere to hide." The general was quiet again. Then she asked the question Marcus had been dreading. "Why should I trust you?" Marcus looked her straight in the eye. "Because you taught me to follow my oath, not my orders." That broke something in her. The hardness in her eyes softened, just for a heartbeat, enough to show that she still remembered the young officer who'd once stood in her command tent, bleeding and defiant, saying those same words. Finally she nodded. "All right, Thompson, you have my attention, but I'll need proof of Hayes's involvement." Sarah tapped the tablet again, bringing up an audio file. Hayes's voice filled the night air, calm, commanding, horrifyingly casual. "Estimated civilian casualties, under 50,000 if containment holds. Acceptable losses. The political leverage will outweigh the risk." Morrison's jaw tightened. She didn't say a word. "There's more," Sarah said. Another file played, a series of encrypted messages showing Hayes communicating with known foreign agents. "He's not just staging a coup," Sarah continued. "He's colluding with outside powers, the kind that want to see America burn from within." Morrison closed the tablet and looked at them both. "If any of this gets out before we act, they'll disappear us before sunrise. We'll need to move in silence." Marcus nodded. "We know." "Then listen carefully," she said. Her voice shifted into command mode, crisp, decisive, the way it always had in the field. "You'll coordinate intelligence and tactical timing. I'll handle the personnel. I still have field commanders who trust me, people not compromised by politics." Sarah asked, "How long will it take to assemble the teams?" 6 hours, Morrison said. "I'll need to vet every name personally. No communications through Pentagon channels. Everything runs dark." Marcus glanced around, scanning the shadows for movement. The monument's floodlights glimmered across the pool like fractured glass. "General," he said quietly, "if this goes wrong." She finished the sentence for him. "We'll be branded as traitors, I know." Then she did something unexpected. She extended her hand to Sarah first. "For what it's worth," Morrison said, "I've spent my life cleaning up after men like Hayes. It's time someone finished the job." Sarah took her hand, and for the first time in years she smiled, a small, tired smile that looked like hope rediscovering itself. As Morrison walked away into the fog, Sarah turned to Marcus. "You trust her?" Marcus watched the general's silhouette fade into the distance. "I trust her enough to bet my life on her, and right now, that's all we've got." They reconvened 8 hours later inside an abandoned warehouse outside Arlington, a temporary command post Morrison had secured using her old covert channels. The place smelled of dust and old oil, but the atmosphere was electric. Maps were spread across tables. Satellite feeds flickered on portable monitors. Morrison stood at the center, issuing orders with quiet precision. "3 teams," she said. "New York, LA, Dallas, each led by someone I trust completely." She pointed to photos pinned to the map. Colonel Martinez, Major Chen, Captain Brooks. Veterans, loyal, clean. Operation Liberty's End will begin at 11:47 p.m. across all 3 cities. Our teams will intercept at 11:43. That gives us 4 minutes to stop the attacks before detonation or execution. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a glance. 4 minutes. "That's not a window," Marcus muttered. "That's a wish." "It's all we've got," Morrison replied. Sarah moved closer to one of the monitors, reviewing live satellite imagery of each target zone: a subway terminal in New York, an airport fuel depot in Los Angeles, and a power grid facility in Dallas. The scale of it made her stomach twist. 3 cities, 3 false flags, 1 night that could end the Republic. Morrison leaned over the table. "If we succeed, we expose them. If we fail, we become the villains in their story," Sarah said quietly. Marcus looked around the room. 3 soldiers and a woman who didn't officially exist, trying to stop a shadow government no one believed in. He thought about the irony, that saving their country meant becoming fugitives in its eyes. He turned to Sarah. "We'll only get 1 shot at this. You ready?" Sarah stared at the map, her expression distant but her voice steady. "I've been ready since Moscow." And as the warehouse filled with the quiet hum of strategy and fate, the 3 of them understood what the night ahead truly meant. It wasn't just about stopping bombs or traitors. It was about saving a country that didn't even know it was in danger. What happens after you save a country that doesn't even know it was dying? 3 months had passed since the night the world almost ended. The headlines had long since faded, the news cycles moved on, and the American public went back to their morning coffee and commutes. But for the ones who had stopped the storm, the echoes never really quieted. Marcus Thompson stood beneath the marble rotunda of the Capitol building, his reflection broken across the polished floor. His suit felt unfamiliar, stiff, like armor that didn't fit right. He'd been a soldier, an intelligence officer, a ghost. But now he was something he'd never been before. A witness. The congressional hearing room was packed. Cameras, senators, reporters pretending they understood what had really happened. They wanted names, details, numbers, but what they really wanted was absolution, to believe the machine could fix itself. Marcus didn't care about absolution. He wanted truth. When his name was called, he rose slowly, every step measured. The murmurs in the room died as he took the stand. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and even. "My name is Marcus Thompson," he began. "I served 15 years in military intelligence. I'm here to testify about Operation Nightfall and about the men and women who gave everything to stop the Prometheus conspiracy." He paused, scanning the room. Faces blurred together, curiosity, disbelief, fear. 3 months ago," he continued, "Admiral Jonathan Hayes attempted to use classified military assets to stage a national emergency. His goal wasn't power, it was permanence. A military government disguised as protection. and he nearly succeeded. He spoke plainly. No heroics, no dramatics, just facts, cold, heavy, undeniable. He described how the Prometheus group had infiltrated the chain of command, manipulated operations, and killed anyone who got too close. How a false flag would have justified martial law. And how they stopped it. When he mentioned Sarah Chen's name, the room shifted. Every camera turned slightly toward the front row, where she sat quietly, dressed in a dark gray suit, her hair tied back. To most people, she was a name from classified files, the woman who didn't exist. But now, she was the face of a truth that refused to stay buried. Marcus finished his statement with no flourish, no closing line, just a final breath that carried everything unsaid. When he stepped down, Sarah met his eyes. There was no smile, but there didn't need to be. It was enough to know they had both survived the kind of war that leaves no medals. Outside the Capitol, the air was crisp and clean. The cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom along the mall, soft pinks against white marble, a strange beauty for a city built on secrets. Sarah joined him a few minutes later, walking quietly beside him. For a long while, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them had become its own language. Finally, she said softly, "They'll use your testimony to rebuild." Marcus nodded, "And to bury what they can't control." She smiled faintly. "You've always been a pessimist." "Realist," he corrected. "Same thing." They stopped at the steps overlooking the reflecting pool. The monument rose high and white against a bright spring sky, the same place where they'd stood 3 months ago, uncertain if they'd live to see sunrise. Now the world looked calm, but calm wasn't peace. Sarah's voice was thoughtful. "They'll reorganize agencies, replace a few faces, write a new oversight act and call it reform. But this doesn't go away, Marcus. It just hides until the next shadow needs a name." He looked at her. "You're staying with the Oversight Committee." She nodded. "They offered me director. It's not glamorous, mostly bureaucratic battles and late nights. But if it keeps the system from devouring itself again, it's worth it." He studied her face. "And after everything, you still believe it can be fixed?" She looked toward the monument. "No, but I believe it can be protected." That was Sarah, not idealistic, not cynical, just grounded in a kind of faith that didn't need to be loud. That night, Marcus found himself alone in his apartment for the first time in months. No gun under the pillow, no encrypted comms buzzing in his ear, no safe house alarms. Just silence, heavy, unfamiliar, almost unbearable. He walked to the window, watching the city lights blur against the glass. The reflection staring back at him didn't look like the man who'd once believed duty and loyalty were the same thing. He poured a drink untouched and instead sat with the silence. He thought of Johnson and Miller, of Petrov, of all the ghosts that had paved the road to this fragile peace. And then he thought of Sarah, the way she'd stood in that warehouse in Chicago, steady and unflinching, like she already knew what the rest of them had yet to understand. That the real enemy was never out there. It was always inside: complacency, ambition, the quiet rot of unchecked power. He realized then that what haunted him wasn't what they'd done, but what they'd seen, the inside of a system willing to destroy itself to stay in control. And yet somehow, amidst that corruption, people like Sarah Chen had still chosen to fight, not for recognition, not for rank, but for something smaller, harder, more human, the belief that truth still mattered. Weeks later, a letter arrived for him, hand-delivered, sealed with no return address. Inside, one line written in neat handwriting. "The fight never ends, but sometimes that's the point. SC." Marcus smiled faintly. He tucked the letter into the folder that held his discharge papers and an old photograph of his unit in Moscow. The last time he'd believed in orders without question. Now he believed in something else entirely. He left Washington quietly the next morning. No press, no farewell, no official closure. Just a train headed south, the kind that didn't require destination forms or clearances. As the city disappeared behind him, he let the rhythm of the tracks drown out the noise in his head. The world outside the window looked ordinary again. Families, small towns, the slow pulse of a country healing from wounds it didn't even know it had. He wondered if anyone would ever really understand what they'd prevented. Probably not. And maybe that was okay. Some victories aren't meant to be celebrated, they're meant to be remembered, quietly. Meanwhile, back in D.C., Sarah stood alone in her new office, the walls still bare, a desk stacked with unfiled reports and declassified evidence. Outside, rain fell softly against the windows. She looked down at the files scattered before her. New threats, old patterns, names that might someday matter. The Prometheus group had fallen, but others would rise. There was always another hand reaching for the controls. But not today. Today she allowed herself to breathe. Morrison had visited earlier, her tone still that mix of warmth and steel. She left her own parting words. "You've earned the right to rest, Sarah, but I know you won't." Sarah had only smiled. Rest doesn't rebuild nations. Now, as she looked out at the Capitol glowing through the rain, she whispered the words Marcus had said months ago, the ones that had stuck with her like a promise. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed the file, turned off the light, and stepped into the hallway. For the first time in years, she didn't look over her shoulder. Later that night, far from the noise of the city, Marcus stood at the edge of a quiet lake. The stars were reflected across the surface, scattered, trembling, beautiful. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his old, encrypted signal device. It had been deactivated months ago, obsolete now. But tonight, for reasons he couldn't explain, he powered it on. The small screen flickered weakly. Then, a single coded pulse blinked in sequence. 3 flashes, pause, 2 reversals, 1 slow arc. Nightfall's old signal. Marcus's breath caught. He hadn't sent it. He typed the countersignal automatically, his muscle memory unbroken even after all this time. Then the device went dark. He smiled, not a warning, not a threat, just a reminder that somewhere out there someone else was still watching, still protecting. And maybe that was enough. The stars shimmered across the still water, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt peace. Not because the fight was over, but because he'd finally understood the purpose of it. It wasn't about winning, it was about keeping watch. And as the night deepened, the faint echo of a familiar voice seemed to drift through the wind, calm, resolute, certain. "Only Black Ops use this signal," he'd said once. She had smiled. "Then maybe it's time we redefine what Black Ops means." Marcus looked up at the stars, a quiet laugh escaping his lips. "Yeah," he whispered, "maybe it is." What if victory was just another illusion, the calm between 2 storms? Sarah Chen sat alone in the briefing room of the newly formed Federal Oversight Division, the agency born from Prometheus's ashes. The walls were white, clean, sterile, too clean. Bureaucracy always built shrines to its own redemption. 3 months of hearings, reconstruction, and reassignments had created an illusion of safety. The press called it a new era of transparency, but Sarah knew better. Transparency was just the government's word for controlled visibility. Stacks of classified reports covered the table in front of her. Each folder was a ghost, names crossed out, details redacted, outcomes pending. On paper, Prometheus was gone. In reality, she could still feel its pulse. Small, quiet, deliberate, like an infection that hadn't been fully cut out. The intercom crackled. "Director Chen, your 900 is here." "Send him in," she said, rubbing her temples. A man in a dark suit entered, young, eager, probably too idealistic for the world he'd just stepped into. "Agent Ryan Keller," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Ma'am, it's an honor." Sarah nodded, shaking his hand. You came from counterintelligence. Yes, ma'am. 2 years at Quantico, one on assignment overseas. Good, she said, sliding a file across the table. Then this will make sense. He opened it and frowned. Financial records. Shell companies. 14 of them, all reactivated within the last month. They match accounts once used by Prometheus for resource routing. But we froze all those, Keller said, confused. Sarah leaned back in her chair. We thought we did. Someone's rebuilding their network, quietly. They're smaller now, smarter, but the pattern's the same. He looked up uneasy. How sure are we? Sarah's eyes met his. I stopped believing in sure a long time ago. She stood, crossing to the large window that overlooked the Capitol skyline. The morning sun glinted off the dome, blinding in its false brilliance. I need you to treat this as internal, she said. No digital records, no paper trail. We investigate in person, analog only. If Prometheus still has roots in the system, they'll see everything we type before we finish typing it. Keller hesitated. Director, are you saying this goes that high up again? Sarah's voice was quiet but sharp. It never stopped being that high. That afternoon, she met with General Morrison in a secure Pentagon sublevel. The older woman looked weary, her uniform crisp but her eyes shadowed by too many long nights. Another ghost hunt? Morrison asked, half smiling. I wish it were just ghosts, Sarah said. I've found transfers routed through decommissioned military contractors. Someone's moving funds under old project designations, names that should have been deleted after Prometheus. Morrison frowned. How much money? Enough to fund an operation, not large, precise, surgical. Target? Unknown, but it's domestic. That word, domestic, made both women go still. Morrison leaned back slowly. After everything that's happened, if someone's planning something inside our borders. Sarah finished the thought. Then we didn't stop Prometheus, we just changed its face. The silence stretched. Morrison finally sighed. You know, Sarah, the hardest part of cleaning up after corruption isn't removing the bad actors. It's convincing the good ones they were part of it. Sarah nodded. That's why I didn't call the White House. I'm calling you. A faint smile tugged at Morrison's lips. Flattery won't make me less tired. It's not flattery, Sarah said. It's trust, and I don't have much of that left. 2 days later, she flew to Norfolk under the guise of an oversight audit. Keller accompanied her, posing as an assistant. The airbase looked ordinary enough, neat rows of hangars, mechanics in coveralls, flags flapping against the sea wind. But the records told another story. Under one hangar, officially marked Storage Unit 12B, millions of dollars in untraceable equipment had been delivered, including encrypted communication arrays and weaponized drones. As they approached, Sarah noticed the guard's posture, too rigid, too aware. These aren't standard security, she murmured. Keller nodded subtly. Private contractors. Probably ex-military, Sarah whispered. Same playbook, new badge. She flashed her credentials at the checkpoint. Federal Oversight Division, random inspection. The guard's jaw tightened slightly, but he stepped aside. Proceed, Director. Inside the hangar, the air was thick with oil and silence. Crates lined the walls, some marked with fake serial numbers. Keller pried one open carefully. Inside was a disassembled drone, sleek and unmarked. This isn't maintenance equipment, he whispered. Sarah crouched beside him. It's reconnaissance grade, AI-assisted tracking, encrypted uplink, same tech Prometheus used during Liberty's end. Her stomach turned cold. History wasn't repeating, it was mutating. Before they could dig further, the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the hangar. 3 men entered, civilian suits, but the kind that hid weapons easily. Sarah rose slowly, instincts sharp. Director Chen, the lead man said smoothly, I wasn't expecting an inspection today. His tone was polite, his smile was. "Then you're behind on your schedule," Sarah replied. "Who authorized this facility?" "Same people who authorized your division," he said, stepping closer. "Funny how oversight doesn't always mean control." Keller shifted slightly, hand near his holster. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You're part of what's left." The man tilted his head. "Part of what remains necessary." That word, necessary, was one Sarah had come to hate. It was the word every monster used to excuse their actions. "Shut it down," she said coldly. He smiled faintly. "You can't shut down an idea, Director. Prometheus wasn't a conspiracy. It was an evolution, and like all things that adapt, it survives." Then he turned and walked out, his men following without looking back. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, the echo of his words burning in her mind. Keller exhaled. "We're compromised, aren't we?" She didn't answer, she didn't need to. That night in her hotel room overlooking the harbor, Sarah stared at the encrypted files they'd pulled from the hangar computers. The data was fragmentary, full of code names: Project Phoenix, Echo Directive, Restoration Protocol. Every one of them carried the same digital watermark, H-12. Sarah's pulse quickened. That designation had appeared once before, in the Moscow files Petrov had given her years ago. It referred to an asset buried deep inside the Pentagon's intelligence structure. An asset who'd never been identified. Morrison's words echoed in her head, convincing the good ones they were part of it. Sarah opened a secure channel to Marcus. His face appeared on the screen, older, tired, but alert the second he saw her expression. "What happened?" he asked. "They're back," she said simply. "Or maybe they never left." He leaned forward. "You have proof." "Not enough for headlines, but enough to know someone's rebuilding Prometheus under a new banner. They're calling it Phoenix." Marcus was silent for a long moment. "You know what that means?" "Yeah," Sarah said quietly. "If Prometheus was about control, Phoenix is about rebirth." He gave a small, grim smile. "Guess the war's not over." "It never is," she murmured. Then softer, "I need your help again." Marcus didn't hesitate. "You have it." The screen flickered as the call ended, leaving her reflection staring back at her tired eyes, a face shaped by too many losses. Outside, thunder rolled across the harbor. Sarah whispered to herself, "Only black ops use this signal, but maybe that's what we need again." The next morning, a message arrived in her secure inbox. No sender, no traceable route. Just a single line of text, blinking softly. "Nightfall never ended. You just forgot how to see in the dark." Her blood ran cold. She stared at the words for a long moment, not out of fear but recognition. Somewhere out there, someone else was watching. Someone who knew what she knew. And maybe someone who had once been one of them. Sarah shut off her monitor, locked the files, and stood by the window. The city below was waking: cars, people, sunlight spilling across marble. Everything looked normal, peaceful, but peace had always been camouflage. As she watched the sunlight touch the Capitol dome, she thought of Marcus's last words before they parted. "The fight doesn't end when you win. It ends when you stop caring." She closed her eyes, took a breath. No, she thought. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting quieter, deeper. And the next enemy wasn't coming from outside. It was already here. How do you fight an enemy that wears the same uniform and speaks the same oath? Marcus Thompson hadn't been back in the field since the night they stopped Prometheus. He promised himself he wouldn't be. But promises, he'd learned, were just words made in peace and broken in silence. The call from Sarah had pulled him out of whatever fragile normal life he'd been pretending to build. He'd left without a plan, without a note, without even finishing his coffee. Now he stood in the desert heat of Nevada, looking at what the Department of Defense had labeled a communications relay test site. It was, he knew it, and so did Sarah. She stepped out of a black SUV, wearing civilian clothes and the same unflinching calm she'd always carried, though now there was something different in her eyes. Less fear, more fatigue. "Still hate the desert," Marcus muttered, squinting against the sun. Sarah handed him a small, encrypted tablet. "Intel from Norfolk. This is one of 6 locations tied to Phoenix funding routes. On paper, it's testing experimental satellite links. In reality..." He scrolled through the data, blueprints, transmission logs, personnel rosters. His jaw tightened. These aren't comms tests. They're running drone coordination trials, multi-city targeting grids. Sarah nodded. They're building a fail-safe network, one that could override domestic defense systems if ever activated. Marcus looked up sharply. "You're saying they could seize control of U.S. defenses remotely?" "Not could," she said. "Will. Phoenix's goal isn't to take over, it's to make takeover automatic." He stared at her. Automation of treason, perfect. Her tone softened. "You didn't have to come, you know." He gave a half-smile. "You called, that's all it takes." Inside the facility, the air was cool, humming with the quiet buzz of machines. Rows of terminals stretched into the dimness, each screen showing lines of code that looped endlessly, waiting for instructions. Keller, Sarah's young agent, met them at the back hallway. His expression was tight. "We've got a problem," he said. "The base commander's expecting a visit from department oversight in an hour, but the credentials match ours." Marcus frowned, meaning someone forged them. Keller nodded. "And whoever it is, they're coming here." Sarah's voice dropped low. "Then we need to see what they're hiding before that happens." They moved deeper into the base, past locked doors and quiet hums of servers. The smell of ozone and metal filled the corridors, the scent of technology designed to outlive morality. In a restricted control room, Marcus found a secure console labeled PHX Core. He connected Sarah's decryption drive. Lines of data flooded the screen: mission protocols, command hierarchies, operational scenarios. Then one word appeared repeatedly: Morrison. Sarah froze. "No." Marcus scrolled further, his heart sinking. The encryption logs were routed through Morrison's clearance codes, active within the last 48 hours. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "She's clean, she's..." Marcus's voice was grim. "She's compromised, or someone's using her identity." The door alarm suddenly blinked red. Unauthorized entry. "Someone's coming," Keller hissed. Marcus killed the console feed and yanked the decryption drive free. They slipped into a maintenance corridor just as voices echoed down the hall. A man in a dark uniform entered the room. His tone was casual, confident. "Wipe the test logs and prep the secondary relay. The director's getting suspicious." Marcus's gut twisted. He recognized that voice. He'd served with it. "Major Lewis," he whispered. "Prometheus Counterintel." Sarah's eyes narrowed. He was declared KIA. "Yeah," Marcus said. "So were we." They moved quickly toward the rear exit. Marcus's mind raced. If Lewis was alive and using Morrison's clearance, then Phoenix had infiltrated the reconstruction process from the start. It meant everything they'd built since Prometheus fell was compromised. Outside, the sun had dipped low, the desert bleeding into orange and shadow. They reached the SUV, but Sarah didn't start it immediately. She just sat there, silent, staring out the windshield. Finally, she spoke. "If Morrison's name is being used, we can't trust the system. We can't even go to her until we know for sure." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we do what we always do." "Go dark," she finished. They ditched the SUV an hour later and drove an old pickup toward the mountains, the kind of vehicle that didn't show up on federal GPS databases. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, barren and honest. It didn't hide secrets. Humans did. Night fell by the time they reached a forgotten radar station from the Cold War era. Sarah parked in the shadow of a rusted satellite dish. Marcus unloaded their gear, spreading the decryption files across the hood of the truck. "These coordinates," he said, pointing to a sequence in the Phoenix network logs, "line up with old relay stations, not military but civil defense. They're integrating legacy systems. No one would even notice." Sarah studied the screen. "That gives them plausible deniability. They can trigger an override under the guise of a system update." "Meaning they can take control of defense systems again," Marcus said. Sarah nodded, "and no one would realize until it's too late." Keller, hunched over his laptop, frowned. "Wait, there's something else here: embedded metadata. Look at this." He expanded a file header. A single phrase appeared in binary code: "Phoenix REQUIRES fire." Marcus exhaled slowly. "That's not code, that's philosophy." Sarah's tone hardened. "Prometheus used that same language. Fire cleanses corruption. It's their ideology, destruction as renewal." For a long moment, the three of them stood in silence, the desert wind whistling around them. Marcus looked at Sarah. "If Morrison isn't behind this, someone's framing her to start a chain reaction. If she's forced into defensive action, if they make her look guilty, the system tears itself apart." Sarah's eyes darkened. "Phoenix rises from the ashes." Back in Washington, General Morrison sat at her desk, unaware that her digital fingerprint was being used to move money and authorize operations. She stared out at the night sky, feeling a strange unease she couldn't name. A soft chime from her terminal drew her attention. A message, no sender, no header, just one line. "They're coming for your name." Her hand froze above the keyboard. Meanwhile in Nevada, Marcus and Sarah loaded their equipment into the truck. Keller was on comms, scanning channels for chatter. Then static. A new signal broke through, encoded in the same nightfall frequency Sarah had once used in that Chicago warehouse. Sarah stiffened. "That's my signal." Marcus frowned. "From where?" Keller's voice trembled slightly. "Somewhere in D.C." Sarah's heart pounded. The signal pattern was old, identical to the counter-sequence she'd shown Marcus the night they met. Only this time, it carried a different tag. "H12. She whispered the hidden asset. Marcus's expression turned grave. "They're reaching out. They know you're onto them." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Then we answer." She entered the counter-signal, fingers steady. The reply came instantly. "The Phoenix is not a conspiracy. It's continuity. You can't stop what's already built into the system." The screen went black. Keller swallowed hard. Was that a threat? Sarah looked at Marcus. No, it was a warning. Hours later, they arrived back on the East Coast under false credentials. The city was alive as always, streetlights glowing, people laughing, the heartbeat of normalcy masking the tremor beneath. They checked into a safe house under an abandoned printing press in Arlington. The air smelled like dust and ink, history layered over history. Marcus paced, restless. "You think Morrison's already compromised?" Sarah shook her head. "I think she's being set up. If Phoenix can tie her to a rogue operation, they'll collapse the oversight division and reinstate emergency command protocols." Keller leaned against the table. "We could release the data to the press." "No," Sarah said sharply. "We tried truth once. It nearly destroyed the country. This time we do it clean, evidence, exposure, precision." Marcus smirked slightly. "You've changed." She gave a faint smile. "You haven't." The silence between them was familiar, filled with everything they never said: the losses, the scars, the quiet respect forged in fire. Finally Marcus asked, "You ever regret it? Moscow, Chicago, any of it?" Sarah looked down at the files spread before her. "Regret?" She paused. "Only that it took me so long to realize the fight isn't about winning. It's about making sure the wrong people don't." Later that night, as the others slept, Sarah sat alone at the table, reviewing the decrypted Phoenix network logs again. A single phrase kept repeating through the timestamps, a hidden line buried deep in the code. When the signal returns, the circle closes. She stared at it, her pulse quickening. That wasn't random data. It was a directive, a trigger. And then she understood. Phoenix wasn't building new systems. They were reawakening old ones. Hidden backdoors, buried in defense software decades ago, installed during Nightfall's creation. Marcus, unknowingly, had helped design the very system they were now trying to stop. Her voice trembled as she whispered into the dark, "You didn't just build a code, Marcus. You built a weapon." What if the greatest threat to freedom was built by the people who swore to defend it? Sarah Chen stared at the glowing screen, her reflection fractured across the code. The Phoenix network wasn't new. It was ancient, the digital skeleton of a forgotten defense protocol, buried deep inside the architecture of America's military command systems. And the worst part, it had Marcus Thompson's fingerprints all over it. He didn't deny it when she confronted him. He didn't flinch. He just stood there in the flickering light of the safe house, hands on the table, voice low and calm. "I built it 20 years ago," he said. "Back when we thought cyber defense meant preemptive control, it was supposed to be a safeguard, a way to keep foreign systems from hijacking our weapons." Sarah's voice was quiet, sharp. "And instead, you gave Prometheus the keys to every system on the planet." Marcus looked up, guilt written deep across his face. "They took what we built and twisted it. You think I don't live with that every day?" The silence was heavy, the kind of silence that carries both truth and betrayal. Sarah exhaled, forcing herself to think. "If Phoenix is using your code, then you're the only one who can stop it." Marcus's gaze hardened. "That's the problem. I designed it to not be stopped." Keller, watching from the side, swallowed nervously. "So what does that mean? We just let it happen?" Marcus shook his head. "No, it means we find the core node, the first relay in the sequence. Destroy that and the rest collapses." Sarah stepped closer. "Where?" Marcus hesitated, and then pulled up a map on the old projector. A red marker blinked over Langley, Virginia. "CIA archives," he said. "Sublevel 4. They never decommissioned the Nightfall mainframe. Phoenix just renamed it." Sarah frowned. "That's a fortress. There's no way we get inside." Marcus gave a faint, almost bitter smile. "There's one way, but it's a one-way trip." Langley, Virginia, 02:17 a.m. The night was wet, the kind of rain that muffles footsteps and hides sins. Marcus, Sarah, and Keller moved through the perimeter woods, wearing non-reflective gear and carrying only analog tools, no digital signatures. The closer they got, the heavier the air felt, like the building itself was aware of them. They reached the service tunnel, rusted and half-forgotten. Marcus knelt, cutting the lock. "Once we're inside, no comms, no backup, just us." Sarah nodded. "We've done worse." He glanced at her, a look that said more than words could. Then they slipped inside. The tunnel led to an access corridor lined with old maintenance panels and flickering lights. At the far end, a reinforced blast door waited, labeled SUBLEVEL4, Archive Operations. Keller hacked the keypad manually. Sparks click. The door opened. Inside, rows of silent servers stretched into the dark, humming with quiet power. In the center of the room stood a circular console, the Phoenix core. Sarah's heart pounded. The console was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Its interface glowed with shifting patterns, living code. It felt sentient, aware. Marcus approached it slowly, placing a hand on the terminal. "It's awake." "What happens if they realize we're here?" Keller asked. "They already have," Marcus replied. Almost on cue, alarms blared, soft at first, then rising into a full-scale alert. Red lights washed the room. Sarah drew her sidearm. "We've got company." Keep them off me, Marcus said, typing rapidly. If I can access the root kernel, I can trigger a recursive lockout, but once it starts, there's no undoing it. Sarah crouched behind a server column, scanning the entryway. Keller took position beside her, trembling but steady. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, fast, coordinated, armed. When the first agents appeared, Sarah didn't hesitate. Controlled bursts, precise movements, non-lethal but efficient. Two dropped, another fell back. Marcus's voice was calm over the noise. We've got maybe 90 seconds. Sarah reloaded. You're at 80. He didn't look up. You always were bad at counting. Just hurry, she snapped, firing again. Another wave entered, heavier, tactical. These weren't guards. These were Phoenix operatives. Keller ducked as rounds tore through a column. Sparks rained over them. They're trying to fry the system. Then let them try, Marcus muttered, fingers dancing across the console. I built this code to survive worse than them. Sarah moved closer, covering him, her breathing steady. But inside, something cold twisted in her chest, the realization that this wasn't a mission. It was a reckoning. Then silence. The lights flickered, and the Phoenix interface froze. Marcus looked up slowly. Got it. The console pulsed once, then dimmed. A low, rising hum filled the air, the kind of sound that didn't come from speakers, but from something alive shutting down. What did you do? Sarah asked. I gave it a paradox, he said quietly. An order it can't execute. It'll destroy itself trying to obey. The lights began to fade one by one, plunging the servers into darkness. But before the last terminal went black, a line of text flashed across the screen. Continuity ensured. Fire cannot die. Then a burst of static. And suddenly, Marcus was thrown backward as the console erupted in sparks. Marcus, Sarah shouted, diving toward him. Smoke filled the room, alarms blaring again. Keller grabbed the med kit, coughing through the haze. Marcus was still conscious, barely. It's done, he rasped, cores collapsing. Sarah knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. You're hurt. He smiled weakly. Nothing new. Don't you dare, she whispered. Not after everything. He looked at her, eyes full of quiet pride, not fear. You remember what Petrov said. Truth doesn't need to shout. Sarah nodded, tears blurring her vision. Marcus's hand tightened around hers, then let it act. She didn't realize she was crying until his grip loosened. Keller's voice cracked through the haze. Director, we need to move. Sarah forced herself up, dragging Marcus's arm over her shoulder. Together, they stumbled toward the exit as flames began licking the server racks. By the time they reached the tunnel, the entire sublevel was glowing red behind them. The Phoenix mainframe was burning. Hours later, Arlington Safe House. Rain hammered against the windows. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Sarah sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee. Across from her, Keller bandaged a burn on his arm. Marcus lay on the cot nearby, breathing shallow but steady. The Phoenix network was gone, wiped, collapsed, unrecoverable, but the victory felt hollow, fragile. Keller looked up. What happens now? Sarah stared into the darkness outside. Now, we make sure it never happens again. But it will, won't it? He said softly. She didn't answer right away. Then, yes, someone will always try to rebuild it. Power doesn't vanish, it adapts. Keller hesitated. So what do we do? Sarah's eyes softened. We keep watch. That's all anyone ever really can do. Later, when the others had fallen asleep, she stepped outside. The storm had passed. The air was cold, clean, quiet. She looked up at the sky, the same sky that had hung over every battlefield she'd ever known. Somewhere far away, she imagined she could still hear the faint hum of that signal, the one only Black Ops ever used. It had started as a code. Then it became a language. And finally a promise. Behind her, Marcus stirred on the cot, whispering her name in his sleep. She turned, watching him, the man who'd once built the weapon that almost ended the world, and then risked everything to destroy it. He wasn't a hero, neither was she. Heroes belonged in movies. They were something rarer, guardians who never asked to be. Sarah took a slow breath, whispering to the dawn. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She turned off the porch light, pocketed her badge, and stepped back inside, into the quiet war that never really ends. Epilogue. Weeks later, in a Pentagon archive long thought destroyed, a single terminal flickered back to life. A line of code blinked across its screen, familiar, rhythmic, deliberate. Only Black Ops use this signal. Then another line appeared beneath it. Then maybe it's time they use it again. The cursor blinked once, twice, and the screen went dark.